Year 8, it's Miss Camwell here again, and today we are going to be reading the first section of Chapter 10 of Animal Farm, which is our last chapter. If you haven't yet watched the 2 YouTube videos I've made on Chapter 9, you can pause and go and have a listen to those. Or I'm going to just do a quick summary now of Chapter 9 so that you're caught up, ready before we read Chapter 10. So, in Chapter 9, the animals are celebrating their so-called victory against Frederick, and they begin building a new windmill. That windmill is built with the efforts of Boxer. As we know, he is a tireless worker who seems to put the farm above his own needs, and he's working even harder in this chapter, despite the fact that he has an injury. He has a split hoof. Food is becoming scarce again. They've had another hard and cold winter. Yet, at the same time, the farm is getting larger. So there are 31 new piglets, and Napoleon is the father of all of them. And he decides that he's going to educate the piglets in their own little schoolroom. So again, you can see that division between the pigs and the other animals, and the idea that education and knowledge kind of brings power. Animal Farm is declared a republic, and Napoleon is declared the president. Once his hoof heals, Boxer works as hard as he can rebuilding the windmill until one day he collapses. At that point, Squealer runs in and says that Napoleon has sent for a vet from Willingdon, and all of the other animals feel slightly uneasy at this. However, when the van arrives to take Boxer to the hospital, their fears seem to go away, and until Benjamin reads the side of the van and points out that he thinks that the van belongs to a knacker, or someone who basically boils down animals to make into glue. Boxer's already in the van, and it's pulling away when all of the animals listen to Benjamin running after the van and screaming for Boxer, and Boxer tries to kind of battle his way out of the van with his hooves, but it's too late, and the van drives away and Boxer is never seen again. Squealer then comes to the animals and says that he'd heard a rumour that Boxer had been taken to the knackers, but explains to the animals that actually it wasn't a knacker's truck, it was simply that the vet had bought the truck from the knackers and hadn't yet repainted the side of the van. And once again, the animals believe, or choose to believe, Squealer's version of events. At the end of the chapter, though, we can see that the pigs are delivered a crate of whiskey, which has been paid for by some mysterious money. And the pigs drink it all and do not wake up until after 12 o'clock on the following day. So, chapter 9 was quite a biggie. We're about now to go into our final one, chapter 10. So, here we go. Chapter 10. Years passed. The seasons came and went, and the short animal lives fled by. A time came when there was no one who remembered the old days before the rebellion, except Clover, Benjamin, Moses the raven, and a number of the pigs. Muriel was dead. Bluebell, Jessie, and Pitcher were dead. Jones too was dead. He had died in an inebriate's home in another part of the country. Snowball was forgotten. Boxer was forgotten, except by the few who had known him. Clover was an old stout mare now, stiff in the joints and with a tendency to rheumy eyes. She was 2 years past retiring age, but in fact, no animal had ever actually retired. The talk of setting aside a corner of the pasture for superannuated animals had long since been dropped. Napoleon was now a mature boar of 24 stone. Squealer was so fat that he could with difficulty see out of his eyes. Only old Benjamin was much the same as ever, except for being a little greyer around the muzzle, and, since Boxer's death, more morose and taciturn than ever. There were many more creatures on the farm now. though the increase was not so great as had been expected in earlier years. Many animals had been born to whom the rebellion was only a dim tradition, passed on by word of mouth, and others had been bought who had never heard mention of such a thing before their arrival. The farm possessed 3 horses now besides Clover. They were fine, upstanding beasts, willing workers and good comrades, but very stupid. None of them proved able to learn the alphabet beyond the letter B. They accepted everything that they were told about the rebellion and the principles of animalism, especially from Clover, for whom they had an almost filial respect, but it was doubtful whether they understood very much of it. The farm was more prosperous now and better organised. It had even been enlarged by 2 fields which had been bought from Mr. Pilkington. The windmill had been successfully completed at last, and the farm possessed a threshing machine and a hay elevator of its own, and various new buildings had been added to it. Whymper had bought himself a dog-cart. The windmill, however, had not after all been used for generating electrical power. It was used for milling corn, and brought in a handsome money profit. The animals were hard at work building yet another windmill. When that one was finished, so it was said, the dynamos would be installed. But the luxuries of which Snowball had once taught the animals to dream, the stalls with electric light and hot and cold water, and the 3-day week, were no longer talked about. Napoleon had denounced such ideas as contrary to the spirit of animalism. The truest happiness, he said, lay in working hard and living frugally. Somehow it seemed as though the farm had grown richer without making the animals themselves any richer, except, of course, for the pigs and dogs. Perhaps this was partly because there were so many pigs and dogs. It was not that these creatures did not work after their fashion. There was, as Squealer was never tired of explaining, endless work in the supervision and organisation of the farm. Much of this work was of a kind that the other animals were too ignorant to understand. For example, Squealer told them that the pigs had to expend enormous labours every day upon mysterious things called files, reports, minutes, and memoranda. These were large sheets of paper which had to be closely covered with writing, and as soon as they were so covered, they were burnt in the furnace. This was of the highest importance for the welfare of the farm, Squealer said. But still, neither pigs nor dogs produced any food by their own labour, and there were very many of them, and their appetites were always good. As for the others, their life, so far as they knew, was as it had always been. They were generally hungry, they slept on straw, they drank from the pool, they laboured in the fields, in winter they were troubled by the cold, and in summer by the flies. Sometimes the older ones among them racked their dim memories and tried to determine whether in the early days of the rebellion, when Jones's expulsion was still recent, things had been better or worse than now. They could not remember. There was nothing with which they could compare their present lives. They had nothing to go on except Squealer's lists of figures, which invariably demonstrated that everything was getting better and better. The animals found the problem insoluble. In any case, they had little time for speculating on such things now. Only old Benjamin professed to remember every detail of his long life, and to know that things never had been, nor ever could be, much better or much worse. Hunger, hardship, and disappointment being, so he said, the unalterable law of life. And yet the animals never gave up hope. More, they never lost, even for an instant, their sense of honour and privilege in being members of Animal Farm. They were still the only farm in the whole country, in all England, owned and operated by animals. Not one of them, not even the youngest, not even the newcomers who had been brought from farms 10 or 20 miles away, ever ceased to marvel at that. And when they heard the gun booming and saw the green flag fluttering at the masthead, their hearts swelled with imperishable pride, and the talk always turned towards the old heroic days, the expulsion of Jones, the writing of the 7 Commandments, the great battles in which the human invaders had been defeated. None of the old dreams had been abandoned. The Republic of the Animals, which Major had foretold, when the green fields of England should be untrodden by human feet, was still believed in. Some day it was coming. It might not be soon. It might not be within the lifetime of any animal now living, but still it was coming. Even the tune of Beasts of England was perhaps hummed secretly here and there. At any rate, it was a fact that every animal on the farm knew it, though no one would have dared to sing it aloud. It might be that their lives were hard and that not all of their hopes had been fulfilled, but they were conscious that they were not as other animals. If they were hungry, it was not from feeding tyrannical human beings. If they worked hard, at least they worked for themselves. No creature among them went upon 2 legs. No creature called any other creature master. All animals were equal. One day in early summer, Squealer ordered the sheep to follow him and led them out to a piece of wasteland at the other side of the farm, which had become overgrown with birch saplings. The sheep spent the whole day there, browsing at the leaves under Squealer's supervision. In the evening, he returned to the farmhouse himself, but, as it was warm weather, told the sheep to stay where they were. It ended by their remaining there for a whole week, during which time the other animals saw nothing of them. Squealer was with them for the greater part of every day. He was, he said, teaching them to sing a new song, for which privacy was needed. It was just after the sheep had returned, on a pleasant evening, when the animals had finished work and were making their way back to the farm buildings, that the terrified neighing of a horse sounded from the yard. Startled, the animals stopped in their tracks. It was Clover's voice. She neighed again, and all the animals broke into a gallop and rushed into the yard. Then they saw what Clover had seen. It was a pig walking on his hind legs. Yes, it was Squealer. A little awkwardly, as though not quite used to supporting his considerable bulk in that position, but with perfect balance, he was strolling across the yard. And, a moment later, out from the door of the farmhouse came a long file of pigs, all walking on their hind legs. Some did it better than others. 1 or 2 were even a trifle unsteady and looked as though they would have liked the support of a stick. But every one of them made his way right round the yard successfully. And finally, there was a tremendous baying of dogs and a shrill crowing from the black cockerel, and out came Napoleon himself, majestically upright, casting haughty glances from side to side, and with his dogs gambolling round him. He carried a whip in his trotter. There was a deadly silence. Amazed, terrified, huddling together, the animals watched the long line of pigs march slowly round the yard. It was as though the world had turned upside down. Then there came a moment when the first shock had worn off, and when, in spite of everything, in spite of their terror of the dogs and of the habit developed through long years of never complaining, never criticising no matter what happened, they might have uttered some word of protest. But just at that moment, as though at a signal, all the sheep burst out into a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs better. 4 legs good, 2 legs better. 4 legs good, 2 legs better. It went on for 5 minutes without stopping, and by the time the sheep had quieted down, the chance to utter any protest had passed, for the pigs had marched back into the farmhouse. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzling at his shoulder. He looked round. It was Clover. Her old eyes looked dimmer than ever. Without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane and led him round to the end of the big barn where the 7 Commandments were written. For a minute or 2 they stood, gazing at the tarred wall with its white lettering. My sight is failing, she said finally. Even when I was young, I could not read what was written there. But it appears to me that wall looks different. Are the 7 commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin? For once, Benjamin consented to break his rule, and he read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing there now, except a single commandment, and it ran, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And on that note, we are going to pause there for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you again tomorrow.